Billy Blue, my knight in shining brindle. Welcome to another episode of A Poet Reads to Write. In our last video, we looked at Sophocles' magnificent tragedy, Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex as the Romans called it. And today, I would like to look at, if you like, part 2 in this trilogy of great Theban plays that Sophocles wrote. So today we will look at part 2, Oedipus at Colonus. In so many ways, Sophocles, as well as being rated by most critics, the greatest of the ancient Athenian tragedians, this is a particular play that is so interesting. In many ways, this is not a tragedy, or not in the usual sense of the word. This is not a play that opens with a great hero favored by the gods, blessed by the gods. A great hero who struts his stuff upon the stage, and at some point, in the play, there is that turn of misfortune where the character, this great hero, is destroyed by the gods in front of our very eyes. In many ways, this is a very different sort of play. Ancient Greek tragedy has such compression, and I love the way this compression forces this different approach to plot and to the way plot is developed. And this play assumes much knowledge. You couldn't watch this play without knowing what happened beforehand. So in this play, we open with the great Oedipus already suffering years and years of misfortune. He is literally a blind, wandering beggar, seemingly despised by all the gods and despised by every person he meets who knows of the story of his patricide and incest. It's such a fascinating play, this. It opens with despair. But what we get by the end of the play, it's almost a tragedy in reverse. What we get by the end of the play is this magnificent redemption, this second chance. Oedipus is given a second chance. This is a beautiful play of redemption and hope. It is, I think, one of my personal favorite plays. I know in the thoughts of, Aristotle and Nietzsche and many other critics, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the King, part 1 of this great series of Theban plays. Oedipus the King was the greatest of all the great tragedies. But for me, I love this play. I am so totally seduced by this tale of redemption and second chances. This play really does make me feel better about my own place in the world. And it's such an interesting play. Sophocles himself was from Colonus. Colonus was this smaller city, if you like, within the limits of what became known as Attica. So in a sense, it's like a suburb, an outlier suburb of Athens. So it's only a couple of miles from Athens. And Sophocles was 90, or almost 90, when he wrote this play. And he himself never got to see it produced because he had passed away from old age before the play was produced. And it was first produced, believe it or not, by his grandson, Sophocles the Younger. Oh, what a backstory. Can you imagine? So Sophocles never got to see this play performed on stage. The way it was interpreted and directed by his own grandson, Sophocles the Younger. Oh, I just love that story. That makes this play even more memorable for me. And of course, This play was first performed at the Great Dionysia, or the Great Dionysia, of 401 BC or BCE. So, what's going on in Athens at that time? Oh my goodness. Athens, of course, is in the final stages of the great Peloponnesian War with Sparta. It is only 2 or 3 years from being defeated by Sparta. And in actual fact, when this play is first performed in about, we think, maybe 401 BCE, when this play is first performed, it's actually performed 2 or 3 years after the destruction of Athens, the defeat of Athens by Sparta. And of course, oh boy, as the result of that, two of Sparta's allies in the Peloponnesian Wars, Corinth and Thebes. Corinth and Thebes, they wanted Athens completely destroyed, annihilated. They wanted every adult male to be executed and every adult female and every child to be sold into slavery. Can you believe it? And fortunately, whether directed by the gods or not, but fortunately Sparta resisted those protestations of both Corinth and Thebes, and they just chose to do something different. The city walls, the navy, all their defenses were completely destroyed, but the city itself was allowed to survive. And after a few years, they were even allowed to restore their democracy. Sparta probably wasn't really being too benevolent. Really, Sparta was at the stage where they were a little bit worried about the rise of Thebes, and they wanted Athens as a buffer between Thebes and themselves. So it suited Sparta not to destroy Athens. But this play, as I just said, it was written by Sophocles in this great climate of uncertainty, this great Peloponnesian Wars that had been raging for 20 or 30 years with so many dead. Athens had suffered from the Great Plague in the early stages of the Peloponnesian War, and maybe a quarter of the citizenry of the city had perished in the plague, including, of course, the great Pericles, the great leader of Athens, who, of course, was a great friend of Sophocles. So Sophocles knew great trauma, uncertainty. He lived with these wars after wars. He went right through the Persian Wars, which then almost, without a moment of breath, went straight into the Peloponnesian Wars. Sophocles lived in a time of incredible change. Athens' fortunes rose to the heights of the Athenian Empire, of the Delian League, the Athenian Empire, as they continued their resistance against Persia in Persia. So, he saw the Parthenon being built. He saw the great theatre of Dionysus being built. Athens was destroyed by the Persians during the early stages of the Persian Wars. Sophocles saw that destruction. He would have returned home to his home in ruins, and he saw the whole of Athens being rebuilt, transformed into the center of the Athenian Empire when Persia was finally defeated in terms of the wars, and they retreated back to their own areas way over in the east. So Sophocles wrote this play at a time when so much was going on. There was so much uncertainty, so much distress. And it's interesting because, as I said, Oedipus at Colonus is a wonderful play of redemption, of second chances. It is I think my favorite Greek tragedy. And so many Christian scholars, particularly going right back to the Roman times and into the medieval world, into the early modern period, there were many Christian theologians and scholars of literature who attempted to see in this play a preemptive strike, if you like, for the great Christian story of redemption, of second chances, of the great crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. And there were many Christian theologians who attempted to see this play as a if you like, setting the scene, preparing the ground for the great story of Christ. This is a great play of second chances and redemption. But of course, there were other scholars like the great German philosopher Hegel. He really didn't like that idea at all. He refused to see this play, even though he knew it was a tale of second chances, of redemption. But he refused to allow the Christian theologians to interpret it too strictly, too explicitly, as a sense of preparing the grounds for the great Christian story. For Hegel, this was a great story of the hero, Oedipus, accepting personal responsibility for deeds that were done under the compulsion of external forces. So Hegel knew that, Oedipus, in a sense, had not committed really patricide, the murder of his own father, and then the incest when he married his own mother. Because, he got into a fight at the crossroads, and in a sense he could argue he was simply trying to defend himself, because the king of thieves at the time, Laios, his own father, was, like Oedipus himself, very quick to temper. And so in a sense, Oedipus, when they had this, if you like, collision at the crossroads between the two chariots, Oedipus, in a sense, got into a fight with his father, unbeknownst to him, because he didn't know it was his father, of course, and all he was doing was defending himself. But the young, great warrior won the battle, and Laios ended up dead. And then, of course, he went to Thebes, had his big confrontation with the Sphinx, defeated the Sphinx, this monster that had been ravaging, holding, siege to Thebes. And as the great deliverer of Thebes from the Sphinx, he then, of course, was heralded, celebrated as he entered the city of Thebes, and of course married the queen, Jocasta, who of course, unbeknownst again to himself, was his own mother. But he did all of this without knowing it. He didn't knowingly commit patricide or incest. In a sense, it was drilled into his future by the gods, particularly by Apollo. So he had no choice, he had no say in it. And that's how Hegel liked to see this, that, this was a story of a great hero who, in a sense, through no fault, through no personal responsibility, was destroyed, brought low by the gods because of this pollution that he brought into the world. Because whether he did it knowingly or not, he was still morally polluted by that act of patricide and incest. It's so interesting. And because there was this moral pollution, as we saw in the last play, Thebes was racked, ruined by plague itself, just like Athens was being racked by plague when, Sophocles actually first wrote and had produced that play, Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King. It's so interesting. Hegel also liked to see Oedipus as being like the great Adam, who lost happiness in gaining the knowledge of good and evil. So a little bit like Nietzsche, as we said in that last video, he saw Oedipus as the first great Superman, the Übermensch, and in transcending himself from a normal human being, a normal male, in transcending himself to this great hero who walked the earth. For Nietzsche, of course, he had to pay the price. And even though, it's not his own fault that he was such a hero and so blessed by the gods at the beginning, but it disturbed the balances in the universe. And so there was another section of gods who wanted to bring Oedipus low. Oh my goodness. And so in a sense, what you have in this play is the soul, Oedipus, purified by the Furies, by these goddesses of the underworld who really see it as their responsibility to defend, to protect the bodies of those that have died and passed away. And so, the fact that the king of Thebes had been killed, whether it had been knowingly done, deliberately done or not, there was this killing that had not been punished. The killer had not been found and punished. So there was this moral imbalance, this impurity, this pollution. So the play really does begin with apotheosis. At the start of the play, Oedipus is old, weak, blind, in rags, carrying a stick and led by his daughters, because at the end of Oedipus, the king, of course, he has gouged out his eyes and gone into forced exile to save Thebes from this moral pollution, and therefore to save Thebes from this plague that had killed a quarter or more of the population. So at the start of the play, our Oedipus really is a little bit like Oscar the Grouch, he's completely on his own. He feels completely destitute, living amidst rubbish, completely isolated on his own, except of course he's not completely on his own because he does have the saving grace of his two daughters. Oh my goodness. So Oedipus, this once proud and powerful king, so blessed by the gods, he is brought low and completely destroyed. And that is where we pick up the story in this play, Oedipus at Colonus. The stage opens with simply Oedipus, his eyes completely blinded by having gouged out his eyes. He's in tatters, he's in rags, he's got his walking stick, and he's being led across the stage by his daughters. And he's been, living in this terrible state of complete isolation, destitute. He's despised, he's hated by the gods. He's hated by every person he meets who recognizes him as Oedipus, as this person, who had committed patricide and incest, because everyone knows the story, the story of how this great hero was brought low by the gods, particularly Apollo. But there is this great oracle, the great oracle of Delphi, again, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. And she has given a great premonition, a prophecy out, and has gone around all the Greek city-states. The oracle of Delphi has said, and Oedipus came to hear of this. It was said by the great oracle of Delphi, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, that wherever Oedipus was buried, the fact that his body, his bones were buried inside a certain city, like, a foundation to build the city upon, that whatever city welcomed Oedipus and buried his body into its foundations, it would be blessed and would never be destroyed. And so even on one level everybody hates Oedipus because he has committed this patricide and incest, was a great hero, now brought so low by the gods, he's clearly hated by the gods. But then there is this prophecy going around the Greek city-states, and all the city-states, even though they hate and they fear Oedipus, because they're worried about, if they bring him into their city too quickly, before the pollution has been cleared away, they might bring misfortune and hatred by the gods onto the whole city, as would happen with Thebes with the plague. But at the same time, all the city-states want his body after death. They want this body so they can bury it in their foundations and know that their city is blessed by the gods and will never be destroyed. So you can see how Sophocles would want this for Athens at the end of the Peloponnesian Wars, when, Athens really did face complete annihilation. And that's exactly what Corinth and Thebes wanted for the future of Athens. Oh my goodness, it's terrible, isn't it? So, by the end of the play, we know that the gods will have transformed Oedipus from this blind beggar and polluted being and brought him back again as a great hero. And of course, he's not going to be the young hero who's able to go and actually do battle with the Sphinx and save a city from monsters. But he is going to be this great hero who, in his death, will bring such good fortune to the city lucky enough to bury his body in their foundations. Oh, it's a fantastic story, isn't it? So Oedipus is transformed from being a supplicant, asking for a place to sit, to being once again this commanding figure. He has achieved, if you like, redemption through his own suffering, through his great suffering, the gouging out of his eyes and the going into forced exile, in accepting that punishment, that vengefulness of the gods. He has been morally cleaned again, and he is ready for the next stage in his life. And this play, while it opens with great despair, you have this sense that maybe Oedipus has a second chance, a shot at redemption in his near future. Oh, it's a wonderful play. I just love it. So the play really is, this great play of redemption for balancing the scales of justice. And as I said, the play actually opens with Oedipus completely oh boy, he's in a bad way. He really is like my Oscar the Grouch. He's in a bad place, in the garbage, in the opening of this play. Here's how this play opens. It's on the stage is simply Oedipus and one of his daughters who is leading him along as this blind beggar with his walking stick. Oedipus says, Antigone, he's addressing one of his daughters. Antigone, child of a blind old man, tell me where we are and who lives in this land, who will take us in today and offer alms to wandering Oedipus. I ask for little and get less, though whatever it is will be enough. Time, the fate I have suffered, and lastly, noble birth. My companions for years have taught me to accept whatever comes. Oh boy, this great hero who is now just living on the scraps of what people discard and throw at him. And Antigone turns back to her father. My poor suffering father, as far as I can see, the city's towers are still some distance. This place, though, where we are now, is sacred, I'm sure, flourishing with laurel, olive and vine, every branch thick with sweet, singing nightingales. Here, bend your knees and rest on this rough rock. It has been a long journey for an old man. And Oedipus says, yes, help me sit down. Look after this poor, blind old man. Oh boy, our hearts are just breaking for him, aren't they? It's interesting too, of course, being a play written by a man about men. We don't feel the same pity for the daughters, do we? All the pity is being left or focused on Oedipus. He's the one who's blind and walking the world as a beggar, asking for the scraps of humankind. But of course, the two daughters have had exactly the same life for the however many years this has been going on. They've also been completely confined to leading this blind beggar along the path, protecting him, making sure his footfalls are okay. And they also are living on the scraps. So we don't feel the same pity, the same focus on the daughters. And Oedipus eventually learns, of course, knowing that this play was written by the great Athenian, Sophocles, even though he's from Colonus, but he's from Attica. He's a great Athenian playwright. And of course, Oedipus learns that he is actually within Attica. They've been walking for so long, they've left Thebes, which is way to the north, of course. And then Thebes was always the great enemy of Athens. So he's left Thebes, he's gone south, and he's finally entered the country of Attica. And he's now in Colonus, only a couple of miles from the great city of Athens. And of course, he's in this sacred grove. And in one world, in one way of looking at things, he could have been punished again by the gods for entering this grove without performing libations and making the proper prayers, because he didn't know where he was. But of course, this is the beginnings of Oedipus' turn for good luck, for good fortune again. And the gods, of course, have directed his and Antigone's footfalls and brought them to this sacred grove. And he meets a countryman and he says, "What can a blind man do? Why do we want you?" Because Oedipus is asking to be taken to the king, or to at least have the king brought to him so he can talk to him, because he wants to see if the king is interested in his body. Does everyone know of this great prophecy of the Delphic oracle? So the countryman says, "What can a blind man do? What could you possibly have that our king would want you for? You're just a blind beggar." And Oedipus says, "My words will be all-seeing." Oh, there's wonderful imagery again, just like in Oedipus the king. There's incredible imagery of eyes, of eyesight, of what eyes can bring in as senses to the mind, to our consciousness. It's astounding. And then Oedipus, oh boy. After saying this, Oedipus has this wonderful speech. He's talking to the countryman and to his daughters, explaining his own position in the world. Oh, listen to this. And they're great words of Ruth Fainlight and Robert Littman, our translators. Oedipus says, raising his hands in prayer, "You fierce-eyed queens, since the sacred seat was the first place in your country where I stopped to rest, do not be harsh to Phoebus or to me. When he prophesied the many ills I'd meet, he also promised that I would find at last a welcome in the furthest land I'd reach, at the holy shrine of awesome goddesses, there to run the last lap of my suffering life, bringing gains to those who take me in, but doom to those who cast me out and drove me away. The foretold signs of what would come were earthquake, thunder of a lightning bolt from Zeus." And of course, we know that the city who cast him out, of course, was Thebes, Athens' great enemy. And now we have Athens, unbeknownst to themselves, welcoming him in. So, in terms of that context of the final stages of the Peloponnesian War, you can see Sophocles. He's offering the Athenians some hope. There is some hope for them. They're terrified of being beaten by Sparta in the Peloponnesian Wars and what defeat might bring to their futures. And Sophocles is really offering them hope. "Now I am sure," Oedipus goes on, "now I am sure it must have some sign, some omen from you which had led me along this road and to this grove. How else, having travelled so far, so soberly, would I have met you, who do not drink wine, or found your unhewn rocky throne? Goddesses, do what Phoebus Apollo foretold, and grant me a final closure and consummation to my life. Unless you think me too lowly, always in thrall to the worst misery a man can know. Come, daughters of ancient darkness, come, Athens, city of great palace, most honoured city of all. Pity this wretched simulacrum of what was Oedipus, whose form and look were once completely different." Oh, the wonderful irony of that, that a city in real historical time, Athens in the final stages of the Peloponnesian War, they know the writing is on the wall. They know at this stage they're losing the war and they are very close to defeat. And that final defeat does happen only a couple of years later after this play was written. And Sophocles is offering Athens this great hope to remember that not only were they founded by the great hero Theseus, who saved the Athenian young from being sent as sacrifice every year, of course, to King Minos's temple on Crete and to the Minotaur in the great labyrinth, the fabled labyrinth. Not only is Athens founded by this great hero Theseus, but within their foundations of their city, they have the buried body, according to this great mythology. They have the body of Oedipus, and that has been promised, therefore, by the gods that their city will never be completely destroyed. So Sophocles is reminding the Athenians of this great hope for themselves in their own time of great peril and trauma and threatened collapse. It's an amazing play, particularly when you put it into the context of what was going on, I think. And then Oedipus says to the chorus, I am the man you seek. If you want something good, if you want some blessing for your future, I am the man you seek. Me, this Oscar the Grouch. Me, this blind beggar being led along by his daughters. And the chorus says to Oedipus, oh, be brave, long-suffering stranger, and learn to hate what our city hates, and love and honor all that we love. So the beginnings of a match made in heaven, the new love affair between Oedipus and perhaps Athens, and Sophocles giving the people of Athens this hope in the time of their greatest peril. It's an amazing play when you put it into its historical context. And Oedipus says, what use is a fine reputation or glory once it flows away like water? Oh boy, we all want a reputation, a good reputation and glory, don't we? But what good is it when it flows away at the end like water? None of us can hold on to our greatness for long. Oh boy. Although my countenance is frightening now, do not dishonor me. Yeah, my countenance is frightening because I really am in the garbage can. I really am, a beggar in rags, blinded, looking for alms. And he performs great libations. Now that he's in this sacred grove and the countrymen from Attica have told him where he is, he performs these libations by pouring wine 3 times to the rising sun. And the chorus said, it is cruel to bring to life a sorrow which was laid to rest. Have you survived the dreadful pain of all that happened? And Oedipus says, I suffered the worst evils, suffered against my will because he didn't knowingly commit patricide or incest. This was all the result, the workings of Apollo and of the gods in his poor life. And the chorus says, oh, you have suffered horribly, anguish after anguish. And Oedipus says, my wretched body is all I have to offer. And we know, because of the oracle, the Delphic oracle, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, we know that he may have only his body to offer. But of course, that is the greatest offering that any city could have. Whatever city buries him within its foundations will have good fortune, will never be destroyed. It will have the protection of the gods. Oh, Sophocles is offering through this wonderful play such hope to his fellow Athenians. And at this very time when Athens, when Colonus is promising to bring him into their walls, Creon, his brother-in-law from Thebes, comes and abducts his daughters, and Oedipus says, oh, wretched am I, woe woe is me. And Theseus promises to, of course, bring back the daughters, to bring them back to. So Theseus promises to make everything right, because at this stage, of course, he really wants the body of Oedipus to be buried at the end in Athens, so that Athens will always be kept safe and be blessed by the gods. And Theseus says, once you go on, my men, as fast as you can to the altars and tell everyone there, because he's raising the alarm to go and get the daughters of Oedipus back from Creon, the abductor. He's trying to take them back to Thebes, because he thinks, of course, if he takes the daughters back to Thebes, Oedipus will follow and they will get his body to bury, so that Thebes will have all of this great luck. So it's this tug of war between Thebes and Athens for the body of Oedipus. And Theseus says, one of you go, my men, as fast as you can to the altars and tell everyone there to leave the sacrifices and hurry on foot, on horseback, at full gallop, and where these two roads which travellers use run together and meet, to make sure the girls do not pass, and I am subdued by force and made to look a fool by this stranger. Hurry as I order. As for him, now he's talking about Creon, of course. This is the punishment of Theseus. In my wrath would rise to what he deserves. He would not escape unscathed, but by the same rules he invoked, he shall be judged and punished. So the same punishment that Creon wanted for Oedipus, for patricide and incest, Theseus is promising that same punishment for him, for the abduction of Oedipus's daughters. And to Creon he says, you shall not leave this country until the girls are brought back and I see them before me. What you have done is an insult to me and unworthy of your own people. So Theseus is promising to be the great saviour of Oedipus and of the girls. And then Oedipus says, this is Oedipus responding to what he's just heard from Theseus and seeing this ill fortune now go back on Creon, his brother-in-law from Thebes. Oedipus says, oh, shameless insolence, whose old age, mine or yours, are the most insulting, with this talk of murder, incest and misery that spews from your mouth, all which I endured unwillingly. Perhaps it pleased the gods to punish me thus, because of some ancient grudge against my kin. Try as you will, you cannot find any fault to reproach me with, nor reason why I sinned against myself and my own. Tell me now, if the oracles prophesied to my father that he would die at the hand of his child, how can I be blamed for this? Being not yet even begotten, nor conceived in my mother's womb. And once I had been born, if I came to blows with my father and killed him, ignorant of who he was or what I did, how can you blame me for that? This unknowing action. So here we have Oedipus setting out his defense to Creon, his brother-in-law. You know, Creon, the brother of the great Jocasta, who of course killed herself when she realized that she'd married her own son, Oedipus, in that previous play, Oedipus the King. Oh boy. And Oedipus concludes this great speech that's actually gone on for another couple of pages. Oedipus concludes this great speech, talking to Creon again and to the great Theseus. Yet you, who are not an honest man, think it is good to say everything regardless, blurt out the unspeakable and make reproaches against me here in front of these men. But you cringe and flatter Theseus and Athens in his city, fulsomely tell him how well it is governed, and in the midst of your praises don't seem to notice that if any country knows how to honor the gods, this one does it best. Sophocles praising Athens, building Athens up again. Because of such actions, I beg with fervent prayer that the goddesses of this holy place come to my aid and be my allies. Then you will learn the sort of men who guard Athens. Oh, Sophocles is offering Athens such hope in their time of greatest peril. And Theseus says to her, you remain here in peace. I will not rest before you have possession again of your children. And Oedipus is then reunited, of course, with his daughters, because Theseus always keeps his word, of course. And Antigone, however, with that sense of foreboding for the future, Oedipus coming back is reunited with her father. But she says to Oedipus, her father, and to Theseus and the other Athenians in present, she says to them, ill-fated, all of us, because this, of course, sets up part 3 of this great Theban cycle by Sophocles, the play Antigone, which we will look at in our next video, and what happens with Antigone when she does eventually, after the death and burial of Oedipus within the walls of Athens, the 2 daughters do go back to Thebes because there's trouble with their brothers and they're trying to save their brothers. And of course, in trying to save their brothers, there's going to be more tragedy because there's this tragedy just keeps going down the generations. It's an amazing thing. And the chorus at the end of the play, oh my goodness, as I've just said too, with this foreboding about what's going to happen when Antigone, the daughter of Oedipus, when she does return to Thebes, trying to save her brothers who have become great kings in their own right of Thebes. But there's trouble brewing, so she returns to try and save the brothers. And the chorus at the end of this play ring out these great words in the words of Robert Littman and Ruth Fainlight. The chorus sings out, whoever wishes to live beyond the average span of life clearly seems a man of folly. Endless days accumulate, always more pain, always less pleasure for the man who lives longer than necessary. But still the helper comes, at least to everyone, without a wedding song or dance or lyre, the doom of Hades. Not to be born is the first choice. Oh my goodness, how desperate is this? It is better not even to have been born. Not to be born is the first choice, the prize beyond any other. But once you have seen the light, the next best is to go back to that dark place from where it came as soon as possible. To die a child is better than to live to adulthood, because life is only misery. Oh, this is bleak. In thoughtless youth, all seems well at first. Then suffering begins, and every blow strikes home. Envy, factions, war and murder, troubles abound, and afterwards comes hateful, feeble old age, crabbed and friendless. The evils compound. Oh boy, that is bleak, isn't it? And such is what this poor man suffers, and no one can escape it, as terrible fate crashes down on his head like a north-facing beach, assailed by wind and storm and battered by waves, some from the place where the sun sets, some from its rising quarter, some from the noonday zenith, and some from the night-shrouded, snow-capped mountains. Oh boy, this play that has just given us such redemption. Oedipus at last has finally been redeemed. He's been saved. He's once again a hero, if old and frail and blind, but a hero nonetheless, who by having his body buried within the walls, the foundations of Athens, will give Athens this future, if not prosperity. They at least know their city will not be destroyed. Sophocles, by reminding the Athenians of the story of their great founder, Theseus, and the way they protected and loved, brought into their city walls the body of Oedipus. In dying, Oedipus has brought this great fortune to Athens that they will not, in the end, be destroyed. And we know at the end of the Peloponnesian Wars, the gods did protect Athens. Athens was not destroyed. The doom of Corinth and Thebes was not meted out to them. You know, they did not have all the adult men executed and all the women and children sold into slavery like Corinth and Thebes wanted for Athens. Sparta spared Athens that on behalf of the gods. Athens was brought low, its city walls destroyed, its navy burnt. But the city survived. The great body, the great hero of Oedipus was brought back, returned to the city, and buried with all honor into its foundation so that this great fortune would come. And Sophocles is offering this great fortune to his fellow Athenians at the closing stages of the bitter Peloponnesian War. Oh, this play that offers second chances and redemption. I just love this play. I think this is maybe it is my favorite play of the great ancient Greek tragedians. This is a play that just offers such hope for second chances and redemption. I love a great story of redemption. So, Sophocles, Oedipus at Colonus, a wonderful play of redemption. Thank you and bye for now.